right, welcome back to part 1 of tariffs. Yeah, so we are going to use economic theory to look at how tariffs impact the supply and demand curve. So, to refresh, let's look at a typical supply and demand curve, like so. So on the horizontal or x-axis, we have quantity, which in future graphs, I'm just going to label Q because I want to be lazy. And on the vertical axis, we have price, or P. So for a given product or service, there is a certain minimum price that producers will be willing to sell, and they will only sell a certain number of those at that lower price. But as the price goes up, the producers or suppliers can sell much more quantity of the amount of goods they have. So we're going to label this the supply curve. So as price goes up, the quantity of supply goes up as well. A given producer will sell more, and more likely you'll have more people in the market, or more suppliers in the market, because they can make a lot of money. So on the flip side, you have the demand curve, which is for consumers. So there is a given price at which consumers will not buy the particular good or service. So there's a certain high point price. And as the price drops, you will have more people who want to buy that particular product. So an iPhone is a good example. If the iPhone was trying to be sold for $10,000 a pop, there wouldn't be that many people, maybe more than I would expect, that would be willing to purchase the iPhone at $10,000. But as they drop the price, more people are going to want to buy it. So this point at which the supply curve and the demand curve intersect is called the equilibrium point. And keep in mind that we are just talking about a home market, or basically what would happen without any trade. So we're going to call this no trade. And I'm going to label this point A. So this is the no trade equilibrium point. So we can quantify how much everybody benefits by having a price set at this equilibrium point. So the consumers would benefit as much mathematically as the area under this curve up until this point. So at this price P, that is the price the consumers are purchasing the product. And so since there are a certain number of people that would be willing to pay a higher price, we call this the consumer surplus, because the consumers are benefiting by this amount by paying a lower price. And actually, this is where a little bit of calculus comes into play, because we remember that the area under the curve tells us basically how much something is. Okay, and so now for the producers. So this area right here is called the producer surplus, or PS, and basically that is the amount that the producers gain by selling at this higher price than some of them are willing to sell. So everybody benefits and they're all happy. But wait, now all of a sudden your country enters into a free trade agreement, which opens up its markets to global trade. So we're going to call this the free trade curve. And so we have price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis, or horizontal axis. So since this is the home market, the supply curve doesn't change. I'll try and draw that the same. But now all of a sudden the demand curve changes a little bit. That's a little hard to quantify, so I'm actually probably going to just draw it the same. Anyway, so this is your original equilibrium point, but now you end up with imports. And so let's say the import price is down here. So now all of a sudden it has dropped the price of that good, so that there is more quantity of people that are purchasing that good at this lower price. So you could say that now the producers have lost some of their original producer surplus, and the remaining producer surplus is now down here. So what does that mean? To really look at the impact of this, let's see, I'm going to call this price with trade. And I'm going to draw a couple of new graphs to really show what happens as a result of the tariff. So let's see if I can fit all of these on the same page. So basically what we could say is that in the free trade case, demand for locally made goods is lower because people can pay a lower price for foreign made goods. So maybe some people are still paying this price, but most people are going to be paying the lower price for foreign made goods. And we actually see this with the popularity of Walmart and Amazon. In general, people want lower prices, so they will often buy cheaper foreign-made goods over more expensive locally made goods. Not always the case, but in general. Okay, so now I get my other graph. Okay, cool. Okay, so now we really want to look at the home market versus the import market. So I'm going to see if I can fit these. So we have another price versus quantity. So this is home and this is import. And again, P and Q. Okay, so first let's look at the import market. So for a given import, this is the quantity of imports. It's an important distinction. And this is the total quantity. So now we have a price curve like this, and I'm going to represent that as M so we don't get confused. So this is the demand curve for imports. And so let's say we can represent the price of imports with basically a flat line and say that this is the price of the imports without the tariff, which I'm going to label X star. To keep consistent with the economists. But now we have a tariff. And so the tariff increases the price because it adds a tax. So that tax is not actually paid, well, I shouldn't say that. The tax may be paid by the importers or the foreign-made goods, but really the tax is passed on to the consumers because the price now is higher. How much higher? Well, it's the original price plus the amount of the tariff. So let's say the tax was 10%. If something costs $10, now it is going to cost $11. So instead of being able to buy, I don't know, a bag of coffee, foreign imported coffee for $10, I'm now paying $11. So the price goes up. And what you could say is that this area here is the deadweight loss due to the tariff. So how does this affect the home market? So let's see if I can draw this as accurate as possible. So we have the demand curve and we have the supply curve and we have our equilibrium point A over here. And now I'm going to draw some lines. So this was the original price without the tariff. Oh, there's our friend the clock. So the original demand we are going to call D1. And you notice that more people are going to be buying at the lower price. That makes sense. And the original supply without the tariff is also, well, this on the other hand is going to be lower. So the demand without the tariff higher, the supply local is lower. So then let's compare that. I should probably draw this all the way. So then this is the supply locally due to the tariff, and this is the demand locally due to the tariff. So here we can actually see visibly that local demand without the tariff is higher than demand with the tariff. But now all of a sudden the producers in the home country are able to sell more because they don't have to compete as much. So And again, this is the price in the trade market plus the tariff, and this is the price without the tariff, but with trade. Okay, so now I'm going to label these 4 sections, A, B, C, and D. My B is a little funky, but this is B. So this triangle right here is actually equal to these 2 sections, B and D. And so to summarize, you could say, to really quantify the net change, the first thing to note is that the consumers actually lose a significant amount. They lose the total area of A plus, I'll do a minus sign, A plus B plus C plus D. So if you were to sum this whole area, that's how much the consumers lose in the economy. Whereas the producers actually gain. The reason why they lose is because now they're paying a higher price. And so there are fewer purchasers. So the producers gain a positive A, which is this area right here, because they are able to charge a higher price, so their producer surplus goes up a little bit. And what is actually kind of interesting is that now, all of a sudden, the government gains because it imposed a tax, which it is now taking in a form of revenue. And the government gains this area here called C. But if you want to find the net change, which I'm going to use with a math symbol for change, the net change is A plus C minus this whole quantity. And so we end up with a negative B plus C, or negative B minus C. So the overall change is negative on the economy. So what this means is that people are actually worse off because we have less dollars in the economy. How many fewer dollars? Well, this area right here. So if you were to actually put specific numbers on this, you could calculate exactly how much the economy would decrease given a certain population and a certain price point for a particular good. With, of course, the tariff, you would also need that as well. So basically, for a small country, a tariff results in higher prices for consumers. This in turn eliminates some consumers who cannot or will not pay the higher price, so there are fewer consumers and demand is lower, as indicated by the original demand without the tariff decreasing to the demand with the tariff in red. This also means higher costs for extra units manufactured domestically or made less efficiently, which is represented by the triangle B. Another way to put it is that all of a sudden you're kind of, you're giving a break to less efficient local manufacturers instead of purchasing, quote, more efficient imports. And that is kind of simplifying, but in general, one could say that. And so the question really becomes then, why might a small country do that? If the overall net is negative and people are worse off, why impose a tariff? Well, it might be the result of special interest pressures on the government. And so, like I said, tariffs benefit a small group of people disproportionately. And so it's easier for them to spend some money and go and talk to people and fight really hard to have their interests protected. They want concentrated gains instead of broadly distributed losses. The producers gain while the consumers lose. Some of the producers might be consumers, but that is likely offset by their personal gains. In other words, they care more about their individual gains than the overall losses in the home economy. Another reason may be that the tariff actually provides a source of revenue for the federal government. And this is often useful when other sources of revenue are difficult. But, excuse me, chalk makes me sneeze sometimes. So This is there's a good example of this in the early stages of the United States. So there wasn't actually an income tax, and so the primary source of revenue for the federal government were tariffs. And so that was useful because they needed a way to raise money to protect private property, to build public infrastructure, and do those really important things that government does. So in that case, a tariff made sense. They were willing to deal with the losses because they needed a way to raise revenue. Okay, so that's the economic mathematics behind tariffs imposed in a small country. And in the next part, part 2, we will look at the economic mathematics behind tariffs in a much larger country or economy that has a lot more sway over the global market. So check that out because it's definitely different. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next part. Yeah.